My son threw me out of my own home. Then the FBI knocked, and everything changed forever. I was 65 when the walls of my own house, the place I had worked decades to build and protect, no longer felt like mine. My name is Edward, but most people call me Ed. I spent my whole life believing that if you work hard, stay honest, and give everything to your family, you'll find peace when you grow old. But peace never came. Instead, betrayal did, and it came from the last place I ever expected, from my own son. For 30 years, I worked as a mechanic. My hands still carry the stains of grease, no matter how many times I scrub. Every bolt and screw I turned, every car I fixed, was so that my wife, Marlene, and our only son, David, could live comfortably. I didn't care about vacations or fancy clothes. I cared about the mortgage, the savings account, and making sure David had opportunities one never had. David grew up in that same house, running in the backyard, climbing the old oak tree, and sleeping in the room I painted blue before he was born. I thought those walls carried love, memories, and protection. But years later, those same walls became a prison for me, a place where I was no longer welcome. It started small. David, now in his 30s, moved back home after his marriage fell apart. I didn't question it. He was my son, and the house was big enough for both of us. At first, it felt almost nice to have him around again. We would have dinners together, sometimes even watch a ball game like we used to. But slowly, the warmth disappeared. David began taking over. He rearranged the living room without asking, telling me the old couch made the house look outdated. He invited friends over at odd hours, laughing and drinking until late at night while I sat upstairs, unable to sleep. I told myself it was temporary, that he was just going through a tough time. Fathers are supposed to be patient. Fathers are supposed to understand. But patience turned into silence, and silence turned into tension. He spoke to me differently now, short, dismissive, sometimes even sharp. When I reminded him to pay a little for groceries or the electricity, he'd snap back, "This house will be mine someday anyway, Dad. Why are you acting like a landlord?" Those words cut deep. This was the home I had built from nothing. My sweat was in the foundation. My back was broken by the labor it took to keep the bills paid. Yet my son stood there, talking like I was just in his way. One evening, the tension reached its peak. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and I had finally gathered the courage to confront him. I told him I couldn't live like this anymore, that respect had to go both ways. His face twisted in anger, and for the first time in my life, he looked at me not as his father but as an obstacle. "Maybe it's time you moved out," he said flatly. I laughed at first, thinking he was joking. But he wasn't. His eyes were cold, his voice steady. "You're old, Dad. You can't handle this house by yourself. You need somewhere smaller, somewhere easier. You should sell this place and retire." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own son, my flesh and blood, was telling me to leave the home I had given him. I felt the ground shift beneath me. My hands trembled on the table. For a long moment, I couldn't even speak. The days after that conversation were a blur of arguments, slammed doors, and silence. I tried to reason with him, but the more I tried, the colder he became. Finally, one night, after another shouting match, he told me outright, "If you don't leave, I'll make sure you do." And just like that, I found myself packing a small suitcase. At 65 years old, I was walking out of the house I thought I would die in. I remember standing on the porch, the cool night air hitting my face, my chest aching as I looked back at the windows glowing with light. That was my home. My life's work. And yet, it no longer belonged to me. For days, I wandered between motels, trying to figure out what had gone so wrong. I didn't tell anyone the full story. I was too ashamed. How could I admit that my own son had thrown me out? Friends would ask, "How's David doing?" and I would just smile weakly, pretending everything was fine. But then, something unexpected happened. 2 weeks later, while I was sitting in a rundown motel room, eating a microwaved meal, I got a call. It was my neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Henderson. Her voice was shaky. She told me that men in dark suits had been knocking at my front door all morning, flashing badges. FBI agents. At first, I thought she was mistaken. The FBI? At my house? What could they possibly want with me? But then it hit me, it wasn't me they were looking for. It was David. My mind raced. I knew my son had been acting strange for months, making secretive phone calls, disappearing for hours at a time. I thought it was just him dealing with his divorce, maybe trying to rebuild his life. But the FBI didn't show up at your door for nothing. This was serious. I drove back to the neighborhood, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When I pulled up, the street was lined with black cars. Agents were walking in and out of my house, carrying boxes of papers and computers. The front door was wide open, and I could see David standing in the living room, his face pale, his hands cuffed behind his back. Time seemed to stop. I stepped out of my car, my legs weak beneath me. One of the agents looked at me and asked, "Are you Edward Mitchell?" I nodded slowly, my throat dry. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions." My son wouldn't even look at me as they led him out of the house. His head was down, his shoulders slumped, but I caught a glimpse of his eyes. They weren't angry anymore. They were filled with something else, fear. I stood frozen on the lawn, watching as they placed him in the back of a black SUV. The neighbors had gathered, whispering among themselves, pointing at me, at him, at the house. Everything felt unreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. One of the agents explained briefly that David was under investigation. He didn't say much, just that they had been watching him for months. Fraud. Money laundering. Words that sounded foreign to me, words I never thought would be connected to my son. And then, the question came, "Did you know about any of this?" My voice cracked as I shook my head. No. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. The agent nodded, but his eyes lingered on me, searching for something. I felt exposed, like the life I had tried so hard to build was crumbling right in front of everyone. As the cars drove away, taking David with them, I stood there alone in front of the house. My house. The place that no longer welcomed me, but still carried my blood, my sweat, and my memories. And now, it was a crime scene. I didn't step inside that day. I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. Instead, I sat on the curb, staring at the house, trying to piece together how my life had unraveled so quickly. My son had betrayed me, pushed me out, and now he was in the hands of the FBI. And yet, despite everything, he was still my son. My heart ached for him, even as anger burned deep inside me. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. Neighbors slowly retreated into their homes, leaving me alone in the fading light. I felt like a ghost, someone who no longer belonged anywhere. And that's where I found myself, caught between love and betrayal, between the past I had built and the uncertain future waiting to unfold. The story wasn't over. It couldn't be. Too many questions remained, too many wounds left open. I just didn't know then how much more was yet to come. The street grew quiet after the FBI cars disappeared, but inside me, nothing was quiet at all. My chest was heavy, my mind spinning. I had lived 65 years, and in that single evening, everything I thought I knew about my son, about my family, about my life, was turned inside out. The house that once felt like a symbol of everything I had worked for now stood there under the weight of suspicion, its walls no longer safe, but stained with shame. I stayed sitting on the curb for what felt like hours. My legs ached, but I couldn't make myself leave. I kept staring at the front door, half expecting David to walk out like nothing had happened, as if this was just a mistake and the FBI had gone to the wrong address. But that didn't happen. The house was empty, and the silence inside pressed against the windows like a secret waiting to suffocate me. Finally, I forced myself to stand. My hands shook as I reached for the front doorknob. It felt strange, as if I no longer had the right to open it, even though it was still my house. I stepped inside and the air hit me, the faint smell of stale beer, fast food wrappers on the counter, and the sharp chemical scent of the fingerprint dust the FBI had left behind. They had searched every corner, pulling open drawers, moving furniture, leaving behind a mess that wasn't just physical but emotional. My son's life had been peeled open in front of strangers, and now I was left to walk through the wreckage. I wandered from room to room. His bedroom was torn apart, clothes thrown across the floor, papers scattered everywhere. There were things I had never seen before, folders filled with numbers and names, receipts that didn't make sense, multiple cell phones shoved into a drawer. My stomach turned as I realized this wasn't some misunderstanding. David had been hiding something. Something big. I sank onto his bed, my hands buried in my face. For years, I had told myself that David was just struggling after the divorce, that he needed time to get back on his feet. But this wasn't the kind of struggle I could excuse. This was deliberate. This was dangerous. And I couldn't understand how my boy, the little kid who used to run barefoot in the yard, chasing fireflies, could become the man who brought the FBI to our door. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my own bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of David's voice telling me to leave the house. The irony cut deep. He had thrown me out of this place, and now he was the one dragged out in handcuffs. The house felt colder than ever, like all the warmth had been drained from it. The next morning, I drove to the county jail. I didn't know if I was even allowed to see him, but I had to try. My hands trembled as I spoke to the officer at the front desk, asking if David Mitchell was being held there. She glanced at her screen and nodded. My chest tightened. She told me visiting hours weren't until the afternoon, so I sat in the waiting area for hours, watching people come and go, each face heavy with its own story of loss and shame. When I finally saw him, sitting behind a sheet of glass, my heart nearly broke. His face was tired, his eyes bloodshot. He picked up the phone on his side and looked at me without speaking for a long moment. I pressed the phone to my ear, my throat dry. "Dad," he whispered. That single word carried so much. Anger. Fear. Regret. Maybe even guilt. But I couldn't tell which emotion was real. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but when I saw his shoulders slumped and his face pale, all I could manage was, "Why, David? What did you do?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." I leaned forward, gripping the phone tighter. "Get this far? They had you in handcuffs. The FBI tore our house apart. What are you caught up in?" He closed his eyes for a moment before speaking. "It's not what you think. I didn't hurt anyone. I was just helping some people move money around. It was supposed to be temporary. I needed the cash, Dad. After the divorce, after everything fell apart, I didn't know what else to do." My stomach turned. Helping people move money around? The words felt dirty in my mouth. "David, that's called money laundering. Do you understand what you've done? You put everything at risk. Not just yourself, me, too. This house. Our name. Everything." He finally looked at me, his eyes wet. I thought I could fix it before it got this bad. I thought I could make it right. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to reach through the glass and hold his hand like I did when he was a child. But I couldn't. The weight of what he had done was too heavy. Instead, I sat there in silence, my chest aching, until the guard tapped the glass, signaling that time was up. As I walked out of the jail, the cold air hit me again. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I felt like I was walking in a dream, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My son was in jail, accused of crimes I didn't even fully understand, and I was left alone to pick up the pieces. The days that followed blurred together. The FBI came back with more questions. They asked about David's habits, his friends, the people who came to the house. They wanted to know if I had noticed anything unusual. Every time they asked, I felt smaller, like I was failing twice, once as a father who didn't see what was happening, and again as a man now trapped in his son's mistakes. At night, I walked through the house in silence. Every corner reminded me of David. The marks on the doorframe where I measured his height each year. The old baseball glove still sitting in the garage. The photo albums filled with birthdays and holidays. I wanted to hate him for what he had done, for how he had treated me, for throwing me out of my own home. But my heart wouldn't let me. No matter what, he was still my son. And that's what made it hurt the most. Weeks passed, and the case against David grew heavier. I sat in court hearings, listening to lawyers use words I barely understood: wire transfers, shell accounts, offshore banking. Each detail painted a picture I didn't recognize, a life David had been living in secret right under my nose. I looked at him across the courtroom, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow, and I wondered if I had failed him somehow. Maybe I had worked too much, missed too many moments when he needed me most. Maybe, in trying to give him everything, I had overlooked what he truly needed. The nights were the hardest. I would sit in the living room, the glow of the lamp casting shadows across the walls, and I would think about the boy I raised. The boy who used to climb onto my shoulders when he was tired. The boy who cried when his dog ran away. The boy who once told me, at age 10, "I want to be just like you, Dad." Where had that boy gone? And who was this man sitting in a jail cell, facing charges that could ruin his life? One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table staring at a stack of unpaid bills, there was a knock on the door. My heart jumped. For a moment, I thought it was the FBI again. But when I opened it, I found a young woman standing there. She looked nervous, clutching a folder to her chest. Her eyes darted past me into the house before settling on mine. "Are you Mr. Mitchell?" she asked softly. I nodded. "My name is Claire. I know David." Those words tightened my chest. She stepped inside when I gestured, sitting across from me at the table. She looked barely 30, her hands trembling as she opened the folder. Inside were papers, receipts, and photographs. My eyes widened as I flipped through them. It was evidence connected to David. But Claire leaned forward and whispered, "There's more to this than you know. David wasn't the only one involved." Her words sank into me like stones dropped in water, rippling through my already fragile world. I stared at her, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" She glanced toward the window, her voice lowering. "The people he was working with, they're dangerous. He tried to get out, but they wouldn't let him. That's why the FBI is watching. That's why everything spiraled out of control." My heart pounded. I gripped the edge of the table, struggling to process her words. If what she was saying was true, then David wasn't just guilty, he was trapped. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as lost as I feared. But before I could ask more, Claire stood abruptly, her eyes filled with urgency. I shouldn't even be here. But you needed to know. Be careful, Mr. Mitchell. They'll be watching you, too. And just like that, she was gone, leaving me with nothing but a folder of secrets and 100 new questions. I sat there long into the night, staring at the papers spread across the table, my mind reeling. My son was guilty, yes, but maybe he wasn't the only one to blame. Maybe there was more to his story, more than betrayal and greed. Maybe there was still something worth saving. The lamp flickered, shadows dancing across the walls. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but restless. The story wasn't over. I could feel it. In fact, it was only just beginning. The papers Claire had left behind sat on the kitchen table like a silent weight, each page pulling me deeper into a reality I wasn't ready to face. I kept staring at them, reading the same words over and over, but the meaning refused to settle in. There were transaction records, phone numbers scribbled on receipts, even photos of men I didn't recognize. One picture in particular made my stomach knot, a photo of David sitting at a diner booth with two men in suits. The men didn't look like friends. Their faces were stern, calculated, like men who didn't smile unless there was something to gain from it. I pushed the papers away and rubbed my eyes, exhaustion pressing against me. For days now, I had been running on fumes, my mind tangled in questions with no clear answers. Why didn't David tell me? How deep was he in this? And who exactly were these men that Claire was so afraid of? Her warning echoed in my ears, they'll be watching you, too. The thought unsettled me. I had lived a simple life, never breaking the law, never getting mixed up in trouble. But now, by some cruel twist, I was standing at the edge of something dangerous and dark, something that stretched far beyond my own home. That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced the living room, glancing out the window every few minutes, half expecting a strange car to be parked outside or shadows moving across the lawn. Every creak in the house felt amplified, every sound outside made me jump. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for whatever came next. By morning, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself. As much as I wanted to protect David, I needed answers, and the only people who seemed to know more than me were the FBI. So I drove downtown to the federal building. My palms were sweating as I walked through the metal detectors, escorted into a small gray interview room. Two agents entered shortly after, their suits crisp, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a tall man with sharp features, introduced himself as Agent Lewis. The other, a woman with kind eyes but a firm tone, was Agent Morales. They sat across from me, their hands folded neatly on the table, waiting for me to speak. I placed Claire's folder in front of them. "A woman gave me this," I said quietly. "She said my son isn't the only one involved. She said there are people watching me." Agent Lewis's eyes narrowed as he flipped through the papers. Agent Morales leaned closer, studying each page carefully. The silence in the room felt like a vice tightening around my chest. Finally, Agent Morales looked up at me. "Who gave this to you?" "Her name is Claire," I said. "That's all I know. She showed up at my door last night and left this. Said David was trapped, that he tried to get out but couldn't." The agents exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Agent Lewis closed the folder and slid it back toward me. "Mr. Mitchell, this is sensitive information. If anyone outside of this investigation knows you have it, you could be in danger." My stomach dropped. "Danger? What do you mean?" Agent Morales leaned forward, her voice calm but serious. "Your son got involved with a network that doesn't forgive mistakes. We've been tracking them for a long time. He may have started small, but once you're in, it's not easy to walk away. These people, they don't just let you quit." Her words sank into me like ice. I thought back to David's face in the jail, the fear behind his eyes. Maybe he really had tried to stop. Maybe he hadn't wanted this life at all. I swallowed hard. "What happens to him now?" Agent Lewis's tone was blunt. "That depends. If he cooperates, if he tells us everything, he might have a chance. But if he stays silent, the law will take its course." My chest tightened. I nodded slowly, my hands trembling in my lap. When I left the building, the city felt louder than usual, car horns blaring, footsteps echoing against the sidewalks, conversations buzzing around me. Yet I felt completely alone, carrying a secret I couldn't share with anyone. That evening, back at the house, I sat at the kitchen table again, the folder still there like an unwelcome guest. I picked up one of the photos and traced my finger along David's face. He looked older than I remembered, tired, as if life had already taken more from him than it ever should have. I thought of Marlene, my late wife, and what she would say if she were here. She had always believed in David, even when he stumbled. She would have told me not to give up on him. And no matter how much anger I carried, I couldn't. The next time I visited David, I told him about Claire. His eyes widened, panic flashing across his face. She came to you, he whispered. Dad, you shouldn't be talking to her. You don't know what you've gotten into. Then explain it to me, I pleaded. Tell me the truth, David. Please. He looked down at his hands, the cuffs clinking softly as he shifted. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then, finally, his voice cracked. I thought I could handle it. At first, it was just moving money for a guy I met. He said it was harmless, just helping him get around the banks. Then it got bigger. More people. More rules. And when I tried to walk away, they made it clear I couldn't. Who are they? I asked. He shook his head quickly. If I tell you, Dad, you'll be in danger too. You already might be. They don't leave loose ends. Fear gripped me, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. Then let the FBI help you. Tell them what you know. It's the only way out. His jaw tightened. You don't understand. These people, they reach everywhere. Even if I talk, I'll never really be safe. And neither will you. I wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes silenced me. He wasn't just scared for himself, he was scared for me, too. That realization pierced deeper than anything else. Despite everything, despite throwing me out, despite the lies, he still cared enough to worry about me. When visiting hours ended, I walked out of the jail with my heart heavier than before. Outside, the sky was gray, rain beginning to fall in slow drops that spotted my jacket. I stood there on the sidewalk, staring up at the clouds, feeling the storm both around me and inside me. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I looked out the window, I thought I saw the same black car parked down the street. Its headlights off, its silhouette barely visible under the streetlight. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe Claire was right. The following morning, I decided to test it. I got in my truck and drove across town, winding through back roads and side streets, watching my mirrors. And there it was, a dark sedan, keeping its distance but never too far behind. My pulse quickened. I drove into a crowded parking lot, parked, and walked into a diner. When I came out 20 minutes later, the sedan was still there. I sat in my truck, gripping the steering wheel, my breath shallow. I had lived a quiet life, never once imagining I would be followed, watched like a suspect in my own story. I didn't know if it was the FBI or someone worse. Either way, I couldn't escape the feeling that my life was no longer mine. Back at the house, the silence felt unbearable. I sat in the living room, the clock ticking loudly, every second dragging me deeper into uncertainty. I thought of calling the agents again, but something held me back. A part of me didn't trust anyone fully now. Not after what David had said about how far these people reached. Late that night, a knock came at the door. My chest tightened. It was soft, almost cautious, not the loud knock of authority. I hesitated, then slowly opened it. Standing there was Claire again, her hood pulled up, her eyes darting nervously around. They know I came to you, she whispered, stepping inside quickly. You're not safe here. I shut the door behind her, my heart pounding. What do you mean? She set a small envelope on the table. This has names. Addresses. People David worked with. If you want to save him, this is what the FBI needs. But once they see this, everything will escalate. You have to be ready. I stared at the envelope, fear and hope colliding in my chest. I didn't know if I could trust her, didn't know if giving this to the FBI would protect David or put us both in even more danger. My life had become a maze with no clear way out, and every turn seemed to carry its own shadow. Claire's eyes softened as she looked at me. He's not a bad man, Mr. Mitchell. He just got caught in something bigger than himself. You can still help him. But you don't have much time. With that, she was gone again, leaving me standing in my kitchen with an envelope that felt heavier than any burden I had ever carried. I held it in my hands, my mind racing, knowing that whatever I chose next would change everything, not just for me, but for David too. And so I stood there, in the quiet of my home, staring at the envelope on the table, the shadows around me growing longer, knowing the story was far from over, and the hardest choices still lay ahead. The silence in the room stretched, thick and unyielding, as though the walls themselves were listening. Layla's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, her mind racing in 100 different directions. She had always feared betrayal, but to witness it in such a raw, undeniable way had shattered something inside her that could not be easily mended. Samir stood frozen by the doorway, his face pale, his eyes flickering between guilt and a desperate urge to explain. But no words came, and the weight of his silence felt heavier than anything he could have spoken. Layla's fingers trembled as she clutched the fabric of her dress, trying to anchor herself to something tangible, something real. The soft ticking of the clock on the wall became unbearably loud. Each second that passed seemed to hammer the truth deeper into her soul, carving wounds that would take far too long to heal. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to unleash the storm raging inside her, but the lump in her throat silenced her. Instead, her eyes, shiny with unshed tears, remained fixed on him. Finally, Samir moved, stepping forward cautiously, as though approaching a fragile glass that might shatter at the slightest touch. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Layla, please, it's not what you think." She let out a hollow laugh, a sound so bitter it startled even her. "Not what I think. I heard it, Samir. I heard every word. Do you think I'm deaf, or do you believe I am so blind with love that I would twist the truth into something softer for you?" Samir flinched at her words. His hand twitched as if he wanted to reach for her, but the distance between them was more than physical, it was an abyss carved by secrets and lies. His mother's shadow loomed heavily in that space too, her absence in the room doing nothing to lessen her presence in their lives. The name that had slipped from his lips during the conversation replayed in Layla's mind. A name tied to promises made long before her, a name that carried chains she had never been told about. It was not just about deception. It was about the life she thought they were building together, the life that had been built on fractured foundations she had never noticed until tonight. Her knees wobbled beneath her, but she forced herself to stay standing, refusing to let weakness take her. The cold air of the room wrapped around her like a cruel embrace. Her voice shook, but her resolve sharpened. "Tell me, Samir. Tell me the truth, all of it. No more half-words, no more silences. I deserve to know what kind of life I walked into." Samir's jaw tightened. His eyes softened with sorrow, but fear lurked beneath them. He dragged a hand through his hair, pacing for a moment before facing her again. "It's complicated. If I tell you, everything will change. You'll hate me, and you'll hate my family." Her heart clenched at the word family. She thought she had married into love, into warmth. Instead, she found herself trapped in webs she hadn't known existed. "Maybe I already do," she whispered, her voice cracking, but the sharpness of her gaze cut through the air. "The only thing I hate more than lies, Samir, is silence. If you truly care about me, you'll tell me. If not, then," her voice faltered, the words too heavy to finish, but the meaning was clear. He swallowed hard, struggling with himself. The silence that followed was unbearable, stretching long enough for Layla's chest to tighten with both hope and dread. She wanted him to choose her, to let truth win over fear. She wanted to believe there was still something worth salvaging. Finally, he spoke, his words trembling. "It's about a promise I made, before you. A promise my mother made me keep. One that has nothing to do with love, but everything to do with duty. I thought I could bury it, move on, but she won't let it go. And now, it's tearing everything apart." Layla's lips parted, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to demand more, but the weight in his voice told her he was only at the edge of what he was willing to reveal. Her fingers curled into fists. What kind of promise? Who was she, Samir? Tell me. His eyes darted to the floor, avoiding hers, and the silence that followed was an answer in itself. The truth was a living thing between them, pressing in, suffocating. She felt it in every heartbeat, in every trembling breath. Her tears finally spilled, hot and relentless, sliding down her cheeks as her voice broke. "You don't even love me enough to fight for honesty." Samir's chest heaved as though her words had pierced him. "That's not true. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. But there are things bigger than us, things I can't just walk away from." Her body trembled, anger and heartbreak colliding inside her. "Then what am I to you? A shield? A distraction? A lie you tell yourself to feel less trapped?" The silence that followed was deafening. Samir took a step toward her, but she stepped back, her hands raised as if to keep him away, to preserve what little strength she had left. The distance grew with each breath, a chasm widening, and she wondered if it could ever be closed. Her mind drifted to the moments they had shared, the laughter, the late-night whispers, the promises made in the dark when the world felt small and safe. How could those memories exist beside this unbearable truth? How could love and betrayal breathe in the same space? Her heart begged for answers, but her soul braced for more pain. She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, her voice shaking as she spoke. "I will not live in shadows, Samir. If you cannot bring the truth into the light, then you will lose me in the darkness." Samir's face twisted with anguish, but his silence returned, wrapping around them like chains. His hesitation told her more than words ever could. And in that hesitation, something inside her shifted. She turned toward the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. The room behind her felt suffocating, filled with ghosts of words unsaid and secrets half buried. The hallway stretched before her like a path into the unknown, and though fear clawed at her, the weight of staying felt heavier than the risk of leaving. But before she could step through, his voice broke the air again, desperate and raw. "Layla, wait." Her body stilled, her hand gripping the handle so tightly her knuckles whitened. She didn't look back, not yet. "Why should I?" The silence that followed was agonizing, but then his words came, trembling with something close to surrender. Because if you walk away now, you'll never know the whole truth. And once you know it, you'll realize, nothing in our lives has ever been what it seems. Her breath hitched, her heart pounding louder than the ticking clock behind them. His words sank deep, clawing at the walls she had built around herself in the last few minutes. Curiosity mixed with fear, and though part of her wanted to slam the door behind her and never look back, another part, stubborn and searching, needed to know. Slowly, she released the handle, her hand falling to her side. She turned, her eyes meeting his once more. The pain between them was a living thing, thick in the air, but so was the faint, flickering thread of something unresolved, something that still tied them together. Her voice was soft, but steady. Then tell me, Samir. Tell me everything. No more lies. No more silence. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. His eyes glistened with fear, but also with the weight of the truth he had carried for too long. He stepped closer, slowly, as though closing the distance might collapse the fragile world between them. And just as his lips parted to speak, the sound of the front door creaking open echoed through the house. Layla's heart jolted. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, her body tensing. Samir froze, his gaze snapping toward the noise. The heavy footsteps that followed sent chills racing up her spine. The shadow that appeared in the doorway was unmistakable. His mother had returned. The room seemed to shrink as her presence filled it, her eyes sharp and unreadable, glancing between the two of them. She carried with her an authority that silenced the air, an authority that had dictated Samir's every step until now. And in that instant, Layla knew, the truth she sought was no longer just in Samir's hands. It was in his mother's, too. The silence pressed in once more, heavy and suffocating, as the three of them stood in that fragile space between past and future, between lies and revelations. And the night was far from over. The silence in the room felt heavier than anything I had ever carried in my life. The agents waited for me to speak, their gazes steady, giving me space but also watching every flicker of my expression. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the edge of the chair, my mind racing between fear, disbelief, and a faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare would finally lead to the truth. I took a shaky breath and began to tell them everything I knew. The strange arguments, the moments when my son would retreat into himself, the way his wife seemed to hold a subtle but suffocating control over the house. I spoke about the sudden hostility, the threats, the unbearable tension that had ended with me being forced out of my own home. Each word spilled out of me like water breaking through a dam. The agents listened without interruption, their faces unreadable, but I could sense they were piecing something together. When I finished, the room was still. The agent across from me leaned forward, his voice calm but serious. He asked me questions, details I had overlooked, things I hadn't even thought to connect. Did my son meet people at odd hours? Did packages arrive that he didn't explain? Had I noticed unfamiliar cars lingering near the house? Each question pressed deeper, and as I answered, I realized how blind I had been to the puzzle forming around me. The weight in my chest grew heavier, but beneath it, a fragile thread of clarity began to form. Maybe this wasn't just about family conflict. Maybe it was about something much larger, something that had been hidden in plain sight while I had been drowning in my own heartbreak. The agents exchanged glances before standing. One of them assured me they would look into everything, but they needed me to stay somewhere safe. Their tone made it clear, this wasn't just for my comfort, it was for my protection. That word lingered in the air, protection, and for the first time since being thrown out, I realized that I wasn't just a discarded parent. I was a witness to something I didn't yet fully understand. They escorted me to a temporary safe house, a quiet place with bare walls and a bed that felt foreign beneath me. The first night there, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and shift of the building. My mind refused to rest, replaying my son's voice as he had ordered me out, the look in his wife's eyes that seemed both triumphant and calculated. A part of me still ached with the desperate hope that I had misunderstood, that maybe he had been under pressure I couldn't see, that somewhere beneath it all, my child was still there, waiting for me to reach him. Days passed in a blur of questioning, of agents returning with new information they couldn't fully share but hinted at with carefully chosen words. They told me enough to know that my son's life was entangled in something dangerous. Each revelation cut deeper, yet I held on to the hope that there was still a way to save him. That maybe all of this could unravel without destroying the last fragile thread that bound us together. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the safe house floor, there was a knock at the door. My heart raced as I opened it, only to find one of the agents standing there, his expression more solemn than ever before. He told me they needed me to come with them. There was something I had to see. I followed them in silence, the car ride long and quiet, every turn of the road pulling me closer to an unknown truth. When we stopped, I realized with a jolt that we were near my old home. My chest tightened as I stepped out, memories rushing back with each glance at the familiar walls and windows. But the scene was far from ordinary. Vehicles lined the street, agents moving with precision, their presence heavy and undeniable. They led me to a spot where I could see without being seen. My son was there, standing in the doorway of the home that had once been filled with laughter and warmth. His wife was beside him, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously as agents spoke to them. I strained to hear, but the distance swallowed their words. All I could feel was the weight of the moment, the knowledge that everything hung by a thread that could snap at any second. One of the agents whispered beside me, explaining quietly, carefully. My son had become entangled in something larger than any of us had realized, pulled into shadows where secrets thrived and loyalties were tested. They weren't just here to question him. They were here because lines had been crossed that could no longer be ignored. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him, torn between the love that had defined my entire life and the fear of what he had become part of. He looked older, more worn, like the boy I had raised had been replaced by a man carrying burdens I couldn't see. His shoulders sagged, his hands trembled just enough for me to notice even from where I stood. For a fleeting moment, our eyes almost met, though I was hidden. My heart twisted with a mix of grief and longing. The agents moved carefully, their presence firm but not violent. This wasn't an arrest, not yet, it was something in between, a final chance to step away from the edge or fall completely. I wanted to run to him, to shout his name, to beg him to remember who he was before all of this. But I stayed frozen, my body heavy with the weight of silence, my voice locked deep inside me. The night deepened, and with it came a stillness that felt like the pause before a storm. The agents eventually led me back to the car, telling me gently that this was only the beginning. That the road ahead would not be simple, but there was still time for choices to be made. Their words echoed in my mind as the car pulled away, the house shrinking in the distance until it was swallowed by darkness. Back at the safe house, I sat alone, the silence pressing in from all sides. I thought of the life I had built, the sacrifices I had made, the love that had once filled every corner of that home. I thought of my son, standing at that doorway with fear in his eyes, and I wondered how far he had fallen, and if there was still a way to reach him before everything crumbled completely. The questions circled endlessly, each one more painful than the last. What had driven him to this? How much did his wife know, and how much had she hidden? Could the child I had once held in my arms still be found beneath the layers of secrecy and fear? Or had he slipped beyond reach, carried away by choices that could never be undone? The night stretched long, and though exhaustion tugged at me, sleep refused to come. I sat by the window, watching the faint glow of city lights in the distance, clinging to the fragile thread of hope that tomorrow would bring clarity. That maybe, in the days ahead, I would find answers, not just about the shadow that had fallen over my son, but about the strength within me to face whatever came next. For now, all I could do was wait, caught between love and fear, between the past I cherished and the uncertain future that loomed before me.